So we had a situation come up that I thought we can quickly cover. I had a client proactively contact me. They were about to register with uh, various secretaries of state where they had employees, and it was interesting because that was a proactive approach where they actually reached out to see if there was going to be any state tax ramifications to that decision to do those authorizations to transact business with the SOSs. And that generally doesn't happen proactively. So I was pleasantly surprised, and we had a really nice discussion about what the ramifications to the state would be if that happened, and also vice versa, what would happen if that didn't happen. It was nice, and I thought we can talk about some horror stories about departments within the company not talking to each other, whether it be IT placing some sort of hardware in the state and not telling finance or tax, or whether it's HR, having an employee, hiring a new employee in the state, a remote employee, and not telling tax or finance to create tax accounts. Or legal going ahead and registering with the Secretary of State, or any other horror stories that we've kind of seen, and the ramifications that have resulted from those decisions. So, anybody want to share a horror story? Stacey.
Pick me. Well, and this one actually Tram was involved in, because one of our clients, they were bidding on a contract in the state of California, and unbeknownst to us, they had to register with the Secretary of State in California in order to even bid on that contract. And we knew that they had previous California presence and owed some tax in California. This was from an income tax perspective. Luckily, what they sold was not subject to sales tax. But for income tax purposes, we knew that they'd had a prior presence. And so we were looking at their exposure, looking at what our options were for remediation, and then come to find out they had already registered with the Secretary of State. And as many people may know or not, you are unable to do a voluntary disclosure in the state of California if you're registered with the Secretary of State. What California does, though, have, which was nice, not every state has this, is they have a voluntary compliance program where so it's works similarly to the voluntary disclosure, doesn't have maybe quite the all the really good kind of conditions as a voluntary disclosure, but it's actually still pretty good. And so we were able to get them into the voluntary compliance program as opposed to the voluntary disclosure program, and get them cleaned up. They still owed some penalties just because that program is not, like I said, as nice as the VDA, but we were still able to, have some success there. That's obviously California. Not every state has that. So that's a horror story of getting registered with the Secretary of State.
Well, and I think from a company interdepartmental perspective, Stacey, didn't you and Alex have to, during COVID, one of our clients had an employee move. They didn't tell anyone, and so the withholding was wrong for local purposes. And so we had to go back and file like amended W-2s, true up withholding, get some money back from the original residency state and give it to the other state, but where it maybe was a bigger issue, because wasn't there some stock comp issued? So like maybe the tax was more significant that just got messed up because someone decided not to, there were multiple parties involved, right? Like the employee moved and didn't tell anyone. Okay, so finally payroll got involved, but didn't tell all of these other branches within the company. And then we had to come in and get paid to fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that is really common.
Mhm.
And obviously, as we've come out of COVID, companies are still fairly agnostic about where they hire and or allowing employees to move around, whether they know it or not. And so that's where the issues will arise, and maybe payroll is not getting notified about it until that employee goes to file their personal income tax return, and they're going, oh, my W-2 has withholding from this state, but I live in this state and I'm trying to file my return in new state and it's not matching, right? So that's where those things are coming up. And unfortunately, some of the companies are behind the 8 ball when it comes to that.
Yeah, and not to kind of keep kicking the payroll dog, or horse, whatever the expression is in this case. It can be whatever I want because I just made it up. But we had a situation where recruiting wasn't even talking to HR correctly. Recruiting was setting new hires up in the system and unknowingly mapping the new hires to the nearest office location, which, in this case happened to be Texas. So there's no personal income tax in Texas. And these employees were working remotely from home, and recruiting didn't know that their home state needed to be set up as the work from jurisdiction. So HR didn't realize this until in some cases several years down the road, and the employees apparently didn't know or didn't communicate, or anyway, there was several levels of failure in communication here. But that was a pretty decent mess to clean up and remap everybody. It was, obviously a very remote employee heavy company, especially during COVID times. So there was a lot of cleanup to do in this case. So that's just another failure of communication between departments.
Something else that I had sparked that kind of as we were talking is we had an incident that came to, sales tax and the salesperson making an adjustment, such that they decided to kind of pick it up at the dock, hand deliver it to, the destination for the client that they were going to visit, which was then going to be somewhere else for use. And so it was like, okay, well, the PO said that we were going to ship this to Texas, but you picked it up from Colorado, but then took it to New Mexico instead, and didn't come up until, someone was doing a refund. And it was like, oh, well, you charged Texas sales tax, when actually this was, for a New Mexico project, but it was picked up but it was technically docked in Colorado. So salespeople, we often find, accounting people get picked on a lot, but the repercussions of that is sales kind of does whatever they want to do to get the sale in, and kind of do workarounds within the system to make it happen that really have an impact on finance and tax for sure.
Oh no, I definitely the client that I'm currently helping, I think that happens probably more often than not. So the salespeople actually kind of do a disservice to the finance and accounting group, because they either don't get the right information to, properly, provide the departments, the appropriate information to even charge the right tax, in the right jurisdiction, kind of what you're saying, or at all. So I think we've seen instances where salespeople don't get addresses, or they get something, but it's not the right address. And so that screws up the sourcing for many things, the sales tax, the income tax. So definitely.
Yeah. Well, and just to kind of circle back on kind of the payroll, right? Like, obviously, like when we've got people moving around, it's not just payroll that we have to worry about. We have to worry about the income tax. We have to worry about the sales tax. And so the payroll can be very messy, but then we need to know, or finance needs to know, and then work with us or their provider, then to make sure that all the other accounts are set up and all the filings are set up properly. So there's just a domino effect of some of these, the physical presence, and also layering in then where the sales take place.
Yeah.
Right. So moral of the story is finance always needs to know.
Right.
So let's take a quick step back then, and kind of give the high level here. Interdepartmental communication at the company, right? Because recruiting, HR, IT, finance, tax, all these departments have as their regular business activities, right? As they're part of their daily function, can make decisions that affect state tax obligations. And then if those decisions are made without the proper steps being taken, most obviously to get a state account, right? Either a sales tax account or an income tax filing or a Secretary of State, some kind of, governmental departmental licensure. Then what happens on the government side is that they start data mining each other, right? And we've seen that where one department will data mine another department, and Secretary of State again being kind of an obvious one. The Department of Revenue, well, maybe annually. I'm sure every state has a different frequency for doing this, but let's say annually they pull a report that says, what are the new licensures that happened this year, and then they cross-reference against a sales tax license, and then they'll send you a love letter. Hey guys, we noticed that you have authority to transact business. Why are we not seeing sales tax returns from you or income tax returns, right?
Or here's a giant Jeopardy assessment for $500,000 because we extrapolated the fact that you declared $20,000 of payroll for one person in our state, and somehow that means you owe $500,000 of income tax.
Yeah. And those numbers are typically nonsense, but you're caught on the heel to try to defend. Now,
and they're
right?
and they tend to be very big to scare you.
Yeah.
Correct. Right.
Yeah.
They get your attention for a reason.
So
cool. Well, thanks for chatting that through, guys.
Yeah, glad you had a success story.
Yeah. I feel like we have a lot more of the opposite.
Well, yeah.
Let's turn that around, guys. No.
Right.
All right.
Education.
We're here for a reason.
We're here to help.